details in the Bible, is that as they uncover pieces of that historical truth, not only does it reunify you with the history, but it also reunifies you with the idea that things that are ancient in origin and have tended to stand the test of time might be kind of valuable, and so you dispense with the importance of that sort of stuff at your own peril. The city of David is located just below what is now traditionally known as the Old City of Jerusalem. The City of David is the original location of Jerusalem, actually. Archaeologists think that this site is the Palace of King David.
My name is Zev Orenstein, and I'm the Director of International Affairs here at the City of David, which is the biblical site of ancient Jerusalem, the place where Jerusalem began. 2005, all this is underground. One morning, an archaeologist by the name of Eilat Mazar, she comes into our visitor center, says, "You need to move your offices." I ask her why. She says, "Beneath your feet, you'll find the Palace of King David." What do you do with that, right? So, we asked her why. So she shows us something. It's in the Israel Museum today, found 60 years ago. You have over here, Royal Phoenician capital. So if you look at these columns over here, imagine a column, this is sitting on top of the column. This proves that where we're standing is the location of King David's palace. What's the connection? In 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 11, it says, King Hiram of Tyre sent envoys to David with cedar logs, carpenters, and stonemasons, and they built a palace for David. The Phoenicians are the ones who the Bible says built David's palace. We find here the Royal Phoenician capital. Why? Well, because the Phoenicians are the ones who built David's palace. They start to dig. They find, to the north, to the east, walls about 8 meters thick. It's clear it's a massive structure here. The question is, from what time period? They find pottery and other organic material at the base of the walls that Dr. Mazar dates to 3,000 years ago, to the time of David. Other people date it to about 100 years after David. So the debate is not what this area was. This was the original Capitol Hill, the royal government ruling center of the Davidic dynasty. And the other thing that we have over here is 2 clay seals, right? In ancient times, before you had encryption and encoding and whatever, you'd write your letter, then you would roll it up, tie it up, but before you'd hand it to the messenger, you take your ring, stick it into the clay, and now on your ring, and now on the clay is your name and then son of your father's name. She's digging here, and she finds 2 seals just like this one, right? This is what Hebrew used to look like, and on the seals there are names, Gedaliah son Pashhur, Juchal son Shlemiyah, 2 of the 4 ministers that made up the security cabinet of King Hezekiah, the last king of the Davidic dynasty, right before the Babylonian destruction. I mean, these are real people. Their seals are found in the royal government center of the Davidic dynasty, where you would expect the ministers of the king to be, right? Not simply as a matter of faith, but as a matter of fact. And a few meters away from here, the same Dr. Mazar finds the seal of King Hezekiah and of the prophet Isaiah. So, I mean, you asked before, how legitimate is this? I mean, the seals here are incontrovertible. Was King David here, ruling here, or his grandson? I can't tell you. The Davidic dynasty was ruling from here. This is where it was, not the old city.
Bathsheba was probably taking...
So think about Bathsheba. It says, what happened to Bathsheba, right? It says one night, the AC is not working in the palace. He goes out into the balcony, and he looks down into the city. What does he see? He sees a woman bathing on the roof. How is it possible for him to see someone bathing on the roof unless
he's elevated?
He's at the top of the city. Now he can look down. When you're in the place where the...
Right. The roofs,
so think about when you're in the place where the Bible happened, the words of the Bible come to life.
You understand the story of David and Bathsheba very clearly when you look at the geography. You have David looking out from his palace, and he sees onto the roof of Uriah, and Bathsheba is bathing up there. He sins with Bathsheba, and then the prophet Nathan comes and chastises and tells him that he's done a grave evil and a grave wrong, and he's forced to atone for that wrong. You can see the geography there, right? Because the palace is sort of on top of a hill, and then there's a valley, and then on the other side of the valley is Solon. So presumably, Bathsheba's house would have been somewhere in Solon. If there's a window right there, this is where David is looking out and seeing Bathsheba bathing naked on the roof, which is always, if you know that the king is sitting up there with his window, bathing on the roof seems like a risky proposition, Here you start to see the beginnings of the idea of a constitutional monarchy. So there are even hints of this in Deuteronomy. One of the laws in Deuteronomy is that the king is supposed to carry around his own Sefer Torah. He's subject to the law. The king is not above the law. So Judaism is very clear about that, and so is Christianity, and henceforth the idea of limitations on absolute government are part and parcel of the whole system.
One of the things that, to me, lends historical credence to those sorts of stories is that it doesn't exactly show David in a positive light. So what kind of propaganda is that?
Exactly. That's definitely one of the things in favor of biblical narrative, is that when you show all the warts, it suggests that you're not propagandizing.
Yeah, definitely. And that happens a lot.
That's the entire Exodus story, right? The idea is that you have an absolute monarch in Pharaoh, and he is a god, and so everything he says goes. And then people are brought forth from slavery to freedom, but the freedom requires subjugation to God, right? You're still a servant, but you're not a servant of a person anymore. Now you're a servant of an ideal. You're a servant of a higher power. And that means inherently limiting the power of human beings. Looks like this is like a massive cistern.
So what you see here is an ancient cistern.
Yeah.
You see the plaster here.
Yeah,
The wall, this
yeah.
will keep the water in.
So people would have carved this out of the rock?
Yeah, sure. And one of the challenges that
Christ.
Israel still has is water scarcity.
Yeah.
And so here's how you'd store water. Now, keep in mind, if we're coming from next to the palace, this is not a private person's cistern. This, you can see, is a massive cistern.
Yeah.
So the cistern that archaeologists believe could have been the cistern where Jeremiah was thrown into a pit. Jeremiah was perceived at that time to be a traitor. He had said that if the people don't change their ways, Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, but he was a prophet of doom. Nobody wanted to hear what he had to say, and the advisors of King Hezekiah got tired of hearing this guy go around calling for the surrender of the city, and so they throw him down into a pit. Now, can I tell you for sure Jeremiah is thrown into this pit? I can't tell you that, right? And if not this pit, one near here like this one. But it says what happens.
All pits are the same,
Pretty much.
if you're thrown into them.
So, but here you say, so what's the plan? He's going to drown, right? It's a cistern. But the Bible makes it clear. There's no water. There's mud. And he's sinking into the mud until a servant of the king goes before Zedekiah and he says, you might not like what Jeremiah is saying, but it's not him who's saying it. It's a prophet. It's a man of God. Right? The words are God's words. You can't do this to Jeremiah. And the king says, all right, you're right. Go take 30 people with you and pull Jeremiah up out of the pit. And then it goes on to say how he keeps true to his message, right? About what's going to happen to Jerusalem, right? But this is where back to the last days of Jerusalem before the Babylonians destroy it. You have Jeremiah here sinking into the mud, hearing the destruction, the impending destruction up above. This is where it's playing out. We take for granted today the ability to be critical of our leadership, to hold our leaders accountable. But going back thousands of years, there was a position in biblical times, that of the prophet, whose role was to go to the highest levels of society and to hold those leaders accountable and let them know that there are consequences for falling short. There are consequences for making poor decisions, unethical decisions.
Both the Judaic side of government and the Greek side of government are predicated on the idea that there are limitations to what government can do. You can make the case that the biblically based system is more of a limited monarchy, where the powers of the king are fairly limited, but the kingship is derived not from the people. And the Greek system is that authority is derived from the people and is almost unlimited. When Aristotle talks about how there are three types of governments and all have the capacity to devolve into tyranny, that's what he's talking about, right? You can have a benevolent monarch, which is more like the biblical system. But even the Bible is pretty divided over whether kings are good or necessary. Samuel gives a whole speech before the appointment of King Saul about, you guys are really going to hate this king thing. You probably shouldn't do it. And the people are like, well, no, we want it anyway. And God says, okay, fine. If they want it, they're going to get it. Probably going to get it good and hard, but that's the...
Every single day here in the city of David, we're unearthing antiquities that show not simply as a matter of faith, but as a matter of fact, Jerusalem's biblical heritage coming to life. We are standing right now in the Givati parking lot excavation. Now you might wonder, why would you name an archaeological excavation after a parking lot? Not too long ago, there was actually a parking lot here, and one day we said, we're going to build our visitor center here. And the Israel Antiquities Authority said, well, hold on. Before you build anything, we need to make sure there's nothing exciting beneath your feet. They come with ground-penetrating radar. They scan down, and they find 10 layers of ancient Jerusalem civilization. This is one of the largest active excavations going on in Jerusalem today, going back some 2,700 years, all the way up to modern times, one layer built atop the next.
This goes down several stories as they uncover additional layers of history over the course of 3,000 years. We're just told up there that this, above our heads, would have been a Roman mansion, actually.
So we're about to enter into a compound that goes back about 2,600 years. And the Bible talks about how in Jerusalem you had all these big structures here, that when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BCE, they burned all these structures to the ground along with the temple. And if you come in here, you'll see something incredible. In the walls, literally, you have remnants of the fire, of the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. That is ash. That is ash from 2,500 years ago, from the actual fires when the Babylonians burned Jerusalem. That's what you're holding in your hand right now.
One of the things that's so interesting about this archaeological dig is that people are using the techniques of scientific archaeology to revitalize the interpretive narrative, because you see the truth of the story revealed in artifact, which is so cool. You were commenting earlier that people have lost faith in Jerusalem, let's say, and are starting to lose faith in Athens too. Maybe because one cannot exist without the other, not in the West. The fact that we had to turn to the object to revitalize the narrative at this time, well, it makes a certain amount of sense conceptually, but it's also quite a striking phenomenon. So yes, this was real, these things happened, whatever real means in a context like that.
Yeah. It's also amazing because the suffering which, Jews commemorate the destruction of Jerusalem till this day, the suffering which is temporary, and then you see, there's a famous story in the Talmud about rabbis visiting the place where they're overlooking the Temple Mount, and they see all the destruction, and there are 3 rabbis, and 2 of them are crying, and one, Rabbi Akiva, is laughing, and they ask him, why are you laughing? And he says, well, it says in the prophets that it's going to be rubble, and there are going to be foxes wandering on the holiest places. And he says, I'm seeing that happen right now, which means that the other part's going to come true. Mm-hmm. And one of the things about being here in the modern age is that you get to see the destruction in the rearview mirror, and then you get to, you look almost straight up and you can see the rebuilding of Jerusalem. It's an amazing, amazing thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that does keep you going through catastrophe is the faith that something can be rebuilt from the rubble.
587 BCE is the year that the Babylonians invade Israel and they destroy the first temple. And you would imagine that this would have been the end of Judaism, and therefore no Christianity and no further Western civilization, right? Typically, in the olden days, when a civilization was destroyed and its chief city burned to the ground, they kind of dissipate into history. You never hear of them again. That's not what happens here. Judaism exists in exile for thousands of years. That Judaism can survive that and then revivify itself, not once but twice. And then they come back to the land of Israel in 1948 and reestablish a thriving state. I mean, it's an unbelievable story of heroic perseverance, but also of the presence of God in history. This pilgrimage road is the road that hundreds of thousands of people would use every single year, several times a year, in order to bring their sacrifices to the Temple Mount. It's in pretty good condition.
It is amazing, yeah.
So we're standing on the pilgrimage road. We're about halfway up. It's about a half mile long. Right? And what we have here is this is the road that 2,000 years ago that our ancestors, when they would have first gone to the Pool of Siloam, cleansed before making their way up the half-mile journey along the pilgrimage road up to the Temple on the Temple Mount. These are the original flagstones from 2,000 years ago. Not stones that look like these. These are the original stones. When they first began excavating the pilgrimage road, they found that there were potholes. They said, okay, well, potholes today, potholes 2,000 years ago. But then they found another one, and another one, and another one, evenly spaced, always in the same spot, as if someone was deliberately breaking open the pilgrimage road. And the question is why? So they looked at the writings of the historian Josephus, and Josephus says in the year 70, the Romans are destroying Jerusalem. The temple atop the Temple Mount in flames. The last Jews of Jerusalem seek refuge from the Romans where? In the drainage channel beneath the pilgrimage road, the ancient sewer system. Archaeologists find whole cooking pots, meaning the people who were down there were there for days, weeks, months, until the Romans find them all and kill them all. Now, the Romans were so proud of their conquest over Jerusalem that they mint a commemorative coin. Here's the Roman Emperor Vespasian, and on the coin you have a Roman legionnaire towering above a Jewish woman on her knees crying. On the coin it says Judea Capta. Judea has been captured.
Yeah.
And here you have the Arch of Titus in Rome. On the arch you have the temple treasures that were being marched out of Jerusalem and into Rome. Now, along this road, along the pilgrimage road here, archaeologists find hundreds, if not thousands, of these small bronze coins, dating back to the period from 66 to 70, the period known as the Great Revolt, the Great Jewish Revolt for Freedom against the Roman occupation. And scholars have long wondered, why are they minting these coins? Because at that time, the coins were worthless. They had no monetary value. And if they really wanted to fight the Romans, what should they have used the metal for? To make weapons. Why are they wasting it on a worthless currency? Well, I want to show you one such coin. This coin here is 2,000 years old. Take a look at this here. 2,000 years old. And that coin, it says in ancient Hebrew writing, for the freedom of Zion. Zion, of course, is another name for Jerusalem. That coin represents a hope, a wish, a dream, and a prayer. That one day, the Jewish people will return to Jerusalem as sovereign. The words on that coin, for a free Jerusalem, they've come true. right? It took a little bit longer than they thought it would, but that hope, that wish, that dream, and that prayer is coming true before our eyes, and there is a free Jerusalem today for people of all faiths and backgrounds. This is not just another piece of history. It's a continuation of a story that's been going on for thousands of years. The people who will walk this road in the future, it's their ancestors who walked on it 2,000 years ago, who worshiped the same God, had the same language, customs, traditions, and festivals. It's alive. It's real. And we're bringing it back here in this excavation.
One of the things that's really cool about the pilgrimage road is that for Christians, there is 100% certainty this is where Jesus walked. There may be a lot of questions about where Jesus was at different times in the Bible. There's no question that Jesus walked the pilgrimage road because all the Jews did. There's a rock there where speakers would stand and they'd make political statements. Probably Jesus was the guy on the side yelling at people, stop worrying so much about the specifics of your sacrifice and start worrying about your closeness with God. And everybody's probably looking at Jesus and they're like, who's that nut job? Like, nothing will come of him, and move on with their day.
A 2,000-year-old ancient soapbox, the only one of its kind found in Jerusalem. And you could imagine when those millions of pilgrims are going up to the temple, you could imagine the likes of whom 2,000 years ago would get up here and preach a religious message, a political message, an ethical message. This is where it's happening, with the shops and stalls all along the way. This is the biblical superhighway, the beating heart of Jerusalem, 2,000 years ago.
Speaker's Corner.
Speaker's Corner, the original Hyde Park, right? For the Jewish people, for early Christianity, this is where the heritage, the values that have shaped Western civilization in many respects, playing out right where we're standing right here.
It's hard to see a soapbox without wanting to climb it. Don't you think?
We gotta get some protesters over here.
Yeah.
It's not gonna work exactly. That's the thing about Jerusalem is that when stuff gets destroyed, it doesn't get fully destroyed. It just gets kind of built on top of, which is the story of civilization in a lot of ways, right?
Right.
Like we like to pretend that when we level things, they're completely leveled. Nothing is completely leveled. It's mostly leveled, and then you just
No
build
matter
up.
how hard the communists try, you mean, to obliterate the past and build the new man.
It's also the nature of human beings. Like we don't really want to clear all the debris. You gotta have something to build on.
This is that idea of a foundation stone, too, is that if our perception is hierarchical, which seems to be the case, you either have a foundation stone or you have fragmentation. Those are the only options.
Right.
And we know what the psychological consequences of fragmentation are. There's two. Anxiety, because it marks fragmentation. Like anxiety occurs when you have too many pathways forward. And hopelessness. And the reason you get hopeless is because if you don't know where you're going, no positive emotion can mark out the path, because positive emotion specifies movement forward on a path. And so if there's no hierarchy that unites, you get fragmentation, and if you get fragmentation, you get anxiety and hopelessness. And that's that. There's no getting around that. That's what those systems are there to mark. And so that's why the monotheistic impulse is so interesting, because it's an impulse to unify everything, and to make it hierarchical in the most fundamental sense, right? It's like, well, does it hit a pinnacle? And the answer is, well, to the degree that it's hierarchical, effectively, then it hits a pinnacle, and then the question is, well, this is the question, right? What should be at the pinnacle, or what should be the base? Those are two different metaphors. So part of what the biblical corpus is trying to do is to take characterizations of the positive patriarchal animating spirit, that's a good way of thinking about it, multiple characterizations of that spirit, and then to make this insistence by aggregating the books that all of those manifestations of those somewhat discriminable spirits are manifestations of the same central thing.
Right.
So you could think that the central animating spirit for Noah is the intuition that calls you to batten down the hatches if you're wise, when a time of crisis is coming. So that's a spirit that might seize you. It might seize multiple people at the same time, and it's a spirit you could attend to and allow to inhabit you or not. So, and then in Abraham, God is the spirit that calls Abraham out of his hyper security and wealth, in some sense, into adventure.
Right.
And then the juxtaposition of those stories, that's metonymy, the juxtaposition of those stories implies that Spirit A and Spirit B are in some sense manifestations.
Links,
You bet. Yeah, it's continu. So the Bible is doing that continually. It's like, and it's not propositional. It's not attempting to explain God as like a meta object in some sense, or an object in the world. It's an animating spirit. It's a pattern of perception and action, and not the pattern of the thing that's being perceived in the object. It's the pattern of perception itself. And so then when you have the union of Athens and Jerusalem, in some sense, you say, well, fair enough, God is the pattern of perception and not the object, but the juxtaposition would say the pattern of perception is seeing a reflection in the object that's similar to the pattern of perception itself.
Right.
And that would be something like the logos, right? So the, the
natural
logos of
law, yeah.
nature and the logos of the spirit unite. And that's Western civilization. Modern people often ask themselves, why do I have to study history? Well, you're a historical being. You need to know who you are and where you came from and what you stand on. Why you think the things you think. What is the appropriate manner to live? Those aren't optional questions. Well, they are, because you can fail to answer all of them, but then you live in a chaotic, desolate, nihilistic wasteland of anxiety and hopelessness. The alternative is to place yourself in the proper tradition. And you have to understand what proper tradition is, and part of that understanding is to start to grapple with the complexities and realities of those traditions.
If Jerusalem is the idea of man meeting God, and this is where revelation becomes reality, then the question becomes, how does man deal with revelation? How do we actually work in a world in which values are discoverable, in which they're important? And that requires that reason come to the fore and reason become a paramount concern for human beings. How does man respond to a universe that is knowable? What kind of resources can human beings bring to a mysterious but knowable universe? That other half, that rational component, is really cultivated to the utmost in Greece.
Well, you might ask, what's wrong with being a populist?
If the people want it, then it must be good, but that obviously is
Yeah,
not
you
true.
just look at Twitter.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm not saying slavery isn't wrong. The issue is, why is it wrong?
Is it wrong because people voted it so? Right?
Well, right, no, it's exactly that. It's not that at all.
We stop by the shrine of the book. We find it astonishing that texts are preserved for this long or that ideas are preserved for this long, but it's sort of the natural state of things.
We think that creative innovation is the standard mode of human being, and that's just not true.
If you're placed in paradise, the first thing you do is you vacation, right?
Mai Tai's on the beach, man.
Exactly. That's an amazing thing in Genesis. Like, even in paradise, human beings have to have
something to do.
something to do.